Hello, this is Rob Hamilton from Soul Canyon Training and Development, and right now I want to spend a couple minutes talking to you about emotional intelligence. It seems like in the last few days, as I've been recovering from my shoulder surgery, I've talked to a lot of people about emotional intelligence, and that, like 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, is one of those things that once you know it, you can build your individual development plan, your team development plan, your organizational development plan around the whole idea. Let's talk about the concept of emotional intelligence before I give you some tenets of it in a nutshell. Concept of emotional intelligence is simple. It's people skills. And this guy, Daniel Goleman, did some research in the late 80s, early 90s, and he actually discovered that people with good people skills are most successful in their careers. Big shock, right? But he actually put some numbers around it. And what he did is he broke down the concept of emotional intelligence into some basic components that when you understand those, you can break those down and build elements of development around it. So let's talk about that. First, let's talk about what Daniel Goleman did. Here are a couple things that Daniel Goleman put together. He wrote this book called Working with Emotional Intelligence, and then he wrote an article for the Harvard Business Review back in the early 2000s called Leadership That Gets Results. The cool thing about this article is that you can go and Google it and read it and get a very nice summary of emotional intelligence and what it means and what you need to do about it for you, your team, or your organization without having to read this entire book. But let's just talk about emotional intelligence for just a few minutes. When Daniel Goleman talks about the concept of emotional intelligence or people skills, he breaks it down into 4 basic components. The first component is self-awareness. People who are emotionally intelligent are self-aware. And there has some dimensions to it as well. Self-awareness basically means you know what you're all about. You know what's important in your life. You know what your core values are. You've taken the time to put together a personal life mission statement, a vision for where you want to take your life so you can be intentional about doing that. So that's an important thing to do. It's also important to know about what you're good at and what you're not so good at and build your development plans accordingly. That's the first concept of emotional intelligence, being self-aware. The second concept of emotional intelligence, also focused on you, is self-control. The ability, among other things, to be able to control your emotions, that is, understand that certain events out in the outside world are hot button issues for you, and work with those. Program yourself to respond maybe differently to those. Learn how to control your emotions and use them productively. Also, learn to be adaptable. There are all sorts of people in the world that come from different perspectives than you, that have different personalities than you. Being able to adapt to those people, communicate differently to them, listen differently to them is extremely important. It's important to be adaptable. Concept of personality styles plays nicely into that. The second 2 components of emotional intelligence are kind of more outward facing. The first element of that is social awareness, being able to understand and empathize with other people. That's the key big social awareness skill, to be able to develop a sense of empathy with other people. Now, when I gave my little talk about 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, we talked about empathy, the ability to at least try to understand someone's perspective, to be able to be an active listener and to listen to someone else's perspective, know where they're coming from. Extremely important to develop a sense of empathy. The most important, I think, though, element of what he talks about in social awareness is to develop a service orientation with what you do. If you take the time to figure out what you're all about, what your strengths, what your weaknesses are, what your mission, what your vision's all about, and then you offer your gifts and talents to the world and other people out of a sense of love for your fellow man, that is, you have a service orientation, you will be successful. And Daniel Goleman talks about that when he expands on the third element of emotional intelligence, social awareness. The final element of emotional intelligence, that fourth piece, is social skill. The ability to be a good listener, to be able to be a good a communicator, an active communicator, someone who can take conflict, deal with difficult people well, all skills that you need to develop if you're going to be emotionally intelligent and successful. So what I recommend to you is you pick up this article, go out to Google and Google Leadership That Gets Results, read all about emotional intelligence in that nice little 12-page article. If you want to expand on that, go ahead and pick up Working with Emotional Intelligence, or give me a call, or give Mary a call here at Soul Canyon Training and Development, and we'll help you. That right there, folks, is emotional intelligence in a nutshell.